Travis, senior tech specialist. Clocked nearly 10 years at the same company. Nothing flashy about it. We build enterprise tools for other businesses. Not exciting, but dependable. The compensation's solid, the technical side keeps me engaged, and for most of that time, the people made it worth sticking around. I'm part of the core dev group, the section that keeps everything actually running. The team functioned like it knew exactly what it was doing. At the center of it all was Arthur, our department head. He wasn't the type to just assign tasks, he actually set the direction. He was in his late 50s, started out as a coder, back when you used punch cards. Knew the system architecture better than the people who designed it. If you had a problem, a real beast of a bug that nobody could figure out, you'd go to Arthur. He'd lean back in his chair, stare at the ceiling for a minute, and then ask you one question that made you see the whole problem differently. He never gave you the answer, he guided you to it, made you a better engineer. Our department had the highest performance metrics in the entire company. We consistently beat our deadlines. Our code had the fewest bugs in production, and our client satisfaction scores were through the roof. We got the biggest bonuses every year. It wasn't because we were geniuses. It was because Arthur created an environment where good work was possible. He filtered all the corporate nonsense from filtering down to us. If some VP had a stupid new idea for a reporting metric, Arthur would handle it. He'd go to the meetings, nod his head, and then create some automated script to generate the report so we didn't have to waste our time. He protected our focus. That was his main thing. The team trusted him completely. We had almost zero employee turnover. I can only remember one guy leaving in the last 5 years, and that was because his wife got a huge job offer in another state. We threw him a massive going-away party. Arthur gave a speech about his contributions. It felt like a family. We worked hard, but the atmosphere was relaxed. Jokes, occasional long lunches, a fantasy football league that Arthur was terrible at but joined every year. It was a place built on merit. If you were good at your job, you were respected. Simple as that. We thought it would last forever. Then the company hired Florence. The announcement came in a company-wide email. A new executive position had been created, Director of Innovation and Synergistic Growth. I remember reading that title and thinking it sounded like it was generated by an AI. The email had a picture of her, professional headshot, smiling a bit too wide. It detailed her background. Lots of time spent in HR consulting, a few years at a nonprofit, and a lot of buzzwords about transformative leadership and future-proofing workplace culture. Not a single mention of software development, engineering, or anything related to what our company actually did. My coworker, a guy named Mike, leaned over his monitor. "She's never written a line of code in her life, has she?" I just shook my head. Her mandate was to oversee several key departments, including ours. This meant Arthur now reported to her. The first meeting was a week later. She called an all-hands for our entire division. She walked into the conference room, and the energy just changed. She wasn't loud or aggressive, but she had this air of absolute certainty. The kind of certainty that only comes from never having been proven wrong by hard data. The presentation started. It was 40 minutes of the most generic corporate speak I've ever heard. Slides with stock photos of diverse, happy people pointing at whiteboards. She talked about breaking down old structures, challenging established hierarchies, and the need to create a more inclusive conversational space. She never once mentioned our products, our clients, or our performance. The most telling moment came near the end. She put up a slide that just said, "The future is collaborative." Then she said, "To build the future, we need to be willing to let go of the past. We need to move on from the old guard ways of thinking and embrace a new, more empathetic paradigm." As she said old guard, her eyes flicked over to Arthur for just a second. It was so fast, you could have missed it. But I saw it, Mike saw it, we all saw it. Arthur didn't react. He just sat there, listening politely, his face a perfect mask of professionalism. After the meeting, the team was buzzing. We knew what that was. That was a shot across the bow. A few days later, the changes started. They were small at first. We got an email from Florence announcing a new mandatory weekly meeting. It was called the Synergy Circle. The purpose, according to the email, was to foster psychological safety and share our emotional truths. The first Synergy Circle was a disaster. We all sat in a conference room. Florence told us to go around the room and share one thing we're grateful for and one professional anxiety we're holding. You could feel the collective cringe. We're engineers. We solve problems with logic and code. This felt like a forced therapy session. One of the junior guys, trying to be a good sport, said he was anxious about an upcoming deadline. Florence told him that deadlines were a construct of patriarchal urgency culture, and that he should honor his feelings first. The junior guy just stared at her, completely baffled. The project he was talking about was for our biggest client. Arthur, ever the diplomat, gently steered the conversation back to something productive. He mentioned being grateful for the team's hard work and said his anxiety was ensuring we had the resources to meet our Q3 goals. Florence just smiled and said that focusing too much on goals was a sign of toxic productivity. The meetings were a complete waste of an hour every week. Then came the one-on-one meetings. Florence scheduled a 30-minute chat with everyone on the team, individually. My turn came on a Wednesday afternoon. I went in expecting to talk about my projects, my career goals. She didn't ask about any of that. Her first question was, "Travis, on a scale of 1 to 10, how emotionally fulfilled do you feel in your role?" I was so taken aback I just said, a 7? She nodded slowly, writing in her notebook. "And what's preventing you from being a 10? I tried to talk about some technical challenges, but she wasn't interested. She asked me about Arthur. "Do you feel Arthur's leadership style is inclusive? Does he create space for voices that are different from his own? Have you ever felt that his focus on results comes at the expense of the team's well-being?" It was a line of questioning designed to get a specific answer. She was fishing for complaints. I gave her nothing. I told her Arthur was the best boss I'd ever had, that he was fair, supportive, and the reason our department was so successful. She just kept smiling that same placid smile, writing in her notebook. "Thank you for your honesty, Travis." I left that meeting with a knot in my stomach. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was building a case. I told Arthur about the meeting. He just sighed. He looked tired. He said that he'd been trying to manage her expectations, to show her the data on our performance. He explained to her that our methods, while maybe old-fashioned to her, produced results. Her response was always the same. Our success was in spite of his leadership style, not because of it. She told him he was resistant to change and a blocker to progress. The atmosphere in the department started to get tense. People stopped joking around as much. Everyone was just head down, trying to avoid drawing attention. The pointless initiatives kept coming. We had to start filling out a daily emotional check-in form. We were mandated to attend a workshop on unpacking male privilege in the tech space. The workshop was led by an outside consultant who kept talking about how male-coded language in our comments, like the word execute, was creating a hostile environment. Our productivity started to dip. All these meetings and forms were eating into our coding time. Projects that were once ahead of schedule were now barely on track. Arthur fought for us. He went to Florence with charts and spreadsheets. He showed her the burn-down charts for our projects, the increase in time spent in non-technical meetings, the direct correlation with slipping deadlines. He wasn't aggressive. He was calm, factual. "Florence, I support the goal of a positive workplace, but these new initiatives are impacting our ability to deliver for our clients. We need to find a better balance." That was the last straw for her. About a week after that meeting, it happened. It was a Tuesday morning. No, maybe a Wednesday. The days were blurring together. Arthur was called into a meeting with Florence and a person from HR. He was in there for about 15 minutes. He walked out, came back to his desk, and didn't say a word. He just picked up his small cardboard box of personal items, a framed photo of his wife and kids, a coffee mug his daughter had made him, a couple of old programming textbooks. He looked around at all of us. We were all frozen, watching him. He just gave us a small, sad smile and a nod. And then he walked out. An HR rep was waiting to escort him. We sat there in absolute silence for a good 5 minutes. Nobody could believe it. They had actually done it. They had fired Arthur. An hour later, Florence sent out an email to the department. It was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It said that Arthur had decided to pursue other opportunities, and that they wished him well in his future endeavors. It talked about a new direction for the department and the exciting opportunity this presented for a leadership refresh. Everyone knew it was a lie. The morale of the team, which had been slowly sinking, hit rock bottom. We felt betrayed. Arthur had built this team. He had mentored every single one of us, and the company had just thrown him out like garbage because he didn't fit with some new executive's ideology. We spent the rest of the day in a daze. No real work got done. People were just talking in hushed tones, updating their resumes and sending messages to Arthur on LinkedIn. We wondered who they would bring in to replace him. Maybe someone from another department, an outside hire with real experience. The next morning, we got our answer. Florence called a team meeting. She walked in with a woman we'd never seen before. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, early 30s. She was smiling nervously. "Team," Florence began, with that same bright, artificial enthusiasm. "I'm thrilled to announce our new department head. Please join me in welcoming Georgia." She gestured to the woman beside her. "Georgia and I have known each other for years. I have seen her leadership skills firsthand, and I know she is exactly the kind of forward-thinking, empathetic leader this department needs to reach the next level." We were all just staring. Mike, who was never afraid to ask the direct question, raised his hand. "What's Georgia's background? What's her experience with our tech stack?" Florence's smile tightened just a little. "Georgia has a rich and diverse background in team building and wellness-focused management. She's going to bring a much-needed focus on people, not just processes." That, of course, answered nothing. The meeting ended. Georgia was now our boss. The first thing I did when I got back to my desk was look her up. Her LinkedIn profile was something, a degree in art history. Her most recent job was studio manager at a high-end yoga studio. Before that, she managed a coffee shop. Before that, she was a freelance lifestyle blogger. There was absolutely nothing in her work history, nothing, that was even remotely related to technology, software engineering, or managing a team of highly technical professionals. Florence hadn't hired a replacement for Arthur. She had installed her unqualified friend in a high-paying job. The realization hit the team like a physical blow. This wasn't about performance or culture. It was about cronyism, dressed up in the language of social justice. Georgia's first week was a study in incompetence. She clearly had no idea what we did. She'd walk around the office smiling at everyone, asking, "How's it going?" If you tried to explain a technical problem, her eyes would just glaze over. Her go-to management technique was to deflect. "Travis, we're hitting a major roadblock with the API integration for Project Condor." She'd nod thoughtfully and say, "Okay, thank you for flagging that. Why don't you sync up with the rest of the team and brainstorm some solutions? I believe in empowering you all to find the answers." That's what Arthur used to do, but he did it after he understood the problem and could provide guidance. Georgia did it because she had no clue what an API even was. She spent most of her first week reimagining our workspace. She got approval from Florence to spend a chunk of our department budget on new furniture, not better chairs or bigger monitors. She bought a bunch of beanbag chairs, a ping-pong table for the break room, and a fancy espresso machine. She also put up a bunch of motivational posters with phrases like "dream bigger" and "good vibes only." While she was doing this, a critical server went down. Normally, Arthur would have been in the thick of it, coordinating the response, communicating with other departments, and managing client expectations. Georgia was trying to decide whether the new ficus plant looked better in the corner or by the window. We managed the crisis ourselves, but it took 3 times as long without a competent leader to run interference. Her first technical decision was a monumental blunder. We had a planning meeting for our next big software release. Georgia decided to run it as a free-form ideation session. There was no agenda. She just put on some calming instrumental music and asked everyone to share what's in their heart. We tried to talk about feature prioritization and resource allocation. She kept redirecting the conversation to things like, "But how does that feature make you feel?" At the end of 2 hours, we had accomplished nothing. She then made a decision about the core feature of the release. 2 senior engineers, including myself, strongly advised against her chosen path. We explained in simple terms that it was technically unfeasible with our current architecture. It would require a massive, time-consuming rewrite. Arthur would have listened to that. He would have trusted his senior people. Georgia smiled and said, "I hear your concerns, but I don't want us to be limited by negative thinking. Let's aim for the stars." She officially greenlit the project. We knew it was doomed to fail. That was the moment the silent rebellion began. It wasn't something we coordinated. It just started happening. The top two senior engineers, guys who had been with the company even longer than me, quietly updated their resumes. They were both gone within a month. They didn't make a scene. They found new jobs, gave their 2 weeks' notice, and left. Their departure was a massive blow. They held so much institutional knowledge, Georgia didn't seem to understand the impact. At a team meeting, she said their leaving was a great opportunity to bring in some fresh perspectives. For those of us who remained, we adopted a new strategy: malicious compliance. We started doing exactly what Georgia asked, to the letter, knowing it would lead to chaos. She asked for a weekly progress report. We didn't give her the simple one-page summary Arthur preferred. We gave her a 100-page document detailing every single line of code, every bug ticket, every internal email. It was technically what she asked for, but it was completely useless. It would take her a full day to read, and she wouldn't understand any of it. She would give vague instructions in meetings. We need to enhance the user experience. We would take that literally. A junior dev spent a week changing the color of all the buttons in the application to a more calming shade of blue. The feature itself remained broken, but hey, the button was calming. Every request, every decision was now documented in email. No more verbal conversations. We needed a paper trail. When she made a bad call, we would reply, all saying, confirming that you have instructed us to proceed with X, despite the technical concerns we raised regarding Y and Z. It was our only defense. The department, once the pride of the company, was now in a nosedive. Our project velocity slowed to a crawl. Deadlines were no longer just missed. They were forgotten entirely. The aim for the STARS project that Georgia had approved was a black hole, sucking up resources and producing nothing. Client complaints started rolling in. First it was emails, then phone calls. Then a major client threatened to pull their contract. Georgia's response to this was to organize a mandatory mindfulness and meditation session for the team to help us cope with the stress. We were all sitting there on yoga mats, being told to breathe deeply, while our biggest account was on fire. Florence was completely insulated from this. Georgia was obviously feeding her a steady diet of nonsense. In the divisional meetings, she would present beautiful PowerPoint slides made by our marketing intern, full of buzzwords about cultural transformation and team empowerment. She talked about how much happier and more engaged our team was, now that we had beanbag chairs and a ping pong table. She never showed the performance metrics, and Florence, who only wanted to hear that her grand experiment was a success, believed every word of it. She saw the departure of our best engineers as a positive sign that she was successfully weeding out the resistance. The rest of the company was starting to notice, though. The sales team was furious because the product was buggy and new features were delayed indefinitely. The customer support team was overwhelmed with tickets from angry clients. We, the engineers on the ground, were stuck in the middle. We were watching the thing we had built with Arthur crumble to dust, all because one executive wanted to give her friend a job. We knew it couldn't last. Something had to break. We just didn't know how spectacular the implosion would be. The slow-motion train wreck continued for the next couple of months. Our department became an island of chaos. We stopped collaborating with other teams unless we absolutely had to. We knew our work was garbage, and we were embarrassed. We were also trying to protect the good people in other departments from the fallout. Georgia, meanwhile, was living in a different reality. She genuinely seemed to believe that things were going well. She'd walk around telling us how much the vibe of the department had improved. "I just love the energy in here now," she'd say. "It's so much more collaborative and less intense." We weren't collaborating. We were emailing each other from 10 feet away to create a paper trail of her bad decisions. The less intense part was just the quiet hum of people browsing job sites. The first major, public crack in the facade happened during a client call. It was with our second biggest account. Let's call them Megacorp. They were getting increasingly frustrated with the delays on their project. Their account manager demanded a meeting with our department head to get a firm timeline. So Georgia had to join the call. Myself and another senior guy, Dave, were there for technical support. It was a bloodbath. The lead from Megacorp, a sharp guy named Ken, did not mince words. He laid out a list of missed deadlines, bugs that had been in the queue for weeks, and a total lack of communication. Georgia tried to use her usual tactics. She started talking about reframing our partnership, and co-creating a journey towards success. Ken was not having it. Georgia, I don't need a journey. I need a working data import feature that was promised to my boss 6 weeks ago. What is the status of that feature? Georgia had no idea. She looked at me and Dave with panic in her eyes. She turned back to the camera. That's a great question, Ken. I'll empower my team to speak to that. Travis, she threw me right under the bus. I unmuted myself and gave Ken the real update. I told him the feature was blocked because of a fundamental architectural flaw that we had identified months ago, but the decision was made to proceed anyway. I told him a realistic timeline was another 2 months, best case scenario, and would require pulling developers off 2 other projects. I was polite, professional, but I did not sugarcoat it. There was a long silence on the call. Ken just said, "Thank you, Travis. That's the first straight answer I've gotten in 2 months." He then turned his attention back to Georgia. "So, to be clear, your team knew this wouldn't work. You pushed ahead anyway. And now you're going to be 3 months late and it's going to delay our entire product launch?" Georgia started to stammer. "Well, I wouldn't frame it as a failure. More as a learning opportunity." Ken cut her off. "I'll be learning about this on my call with your VP of sales tomorrow." He ended the call. As soon as the line was dead, Georgia looked at me. The friendly, smiling mask was gone. "What was that? You made me look like a fool." I just stared back. I told him the truth. "What did you want me to do, Lai?" "You should have been a team player," she said. "We need to present a united front." That was the moment I stopped seeing her as just incompetent. She was actively malicious. She wanted me to lie to a client to cover for her mistake. The fallout from that call was a slap on the wrist. Florence swooped in to do damage control. She had a call with Ken and the VP. She must have spun some incredible story about growing pains and strategic realignment, because nothing happened to Georgia. Instead, Florence sent an email to our department about the importance of unified messaging and managing client perceptions. It was a warning shot, aimed directly at me. The next brilliant idea from Georgia was a mandatory off-site team-building retreat. Because our department's problem was clearly that we didn't like each other enough, she spent thousands of dollars from our dwindling budget to rent a cabin by a lake for a day. We had to drive 2 hours out of the city to get there. The entire day was a series of excruciating HR-approved exercises. We did trust falls. I literally had to let myself fall backwards into the arms of my coworkers. We had to go around in a circle and say what we admired about the person to our right. The whole time, I'm getting frantic emails on my phone from the support team about another server outage. The final activity was the worst. The facilitator, a guy who looked like he'd been cryogenically frozen in 1995, had us all sit on the floor. He asked us to build a machine that represents our team, using only our bodies. I have never felt my soul want to leave my body more than in that moment. So, there we were, a group of highly paid software engineers, crawling around on the floor pretending to be cogs and levers, while our entire product suite was on fire. The ride back to the city was silent. We were all completely defeated. This retreat was a turning point for a few more people. Dave, the other senior guy on the client call, put in his 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. His exit interview was apparently brutal. He told HR exactly what was wrong. Incompetent leadership was driving the company's most profitable department into the ground. HR just nodded and filed the paperwork. They were there to protect the company from lawsuits, not to solve problems. With Dave gone, I was now the last remaining senior specialist from Arthur's era. I became the de facto repository for all the knowledge. Georgia started relying on me for everything, which I hated. She'd call me into her office 10 times a day to ask basic questions she could have Googled. "Travis, what's a pull request?" "Travis, the sales team is asking for our API documentation. What do I send them?" I would answer her in the most dry, technical way possible. I gave her no more and no less than what she asked for. My malicious compliance became a high art. The quarter was drawing to a close, and we all knew the numbers were going to be horrific. Our team's performance was measured by a set of key metrics: features shipped, bug resolution time, system uptime, and client satisfaction. Under Arthur, we were green on all of them, every single quarter. I had access to the dashboard. I watched the numbers. Features shipped was down 60%. Bug resolution time had tripled. System uptime was at its lowest in 5 years. Client satisfaction was a sea of red. A week before the official quarterly review meeting, Georgia called me into her office. She had a printout of the metrics dashboard in front of her. For the first time, she looked genuinely worried. "Travis, these numbers, they don't look right." "Those are the numbers," I said. "The system pulls them automatically. They're accurate. But why are they so low?" I almost laughed. "Because our 2 best engineers quit. Because we spent the last 3 months on projects that were technically impossible. Because our time is spent in synergy circles and filling out emotional check-in forms instead of writing code." I laid it all out. I wasn't emotional, just factual. She just stared at me. The reality was finally starting to penetrate her bubble of corporate wellness jargon. "Florence is going to be furious," she whispered. "Probably," I said. Then she said something that sealed her fate in my mind. "We need to fix this. We need to frame this data in a more positive light." She wasn't asking to fix the problems. She was asking to manipulate the report. "I don't know how to do that," I told her. "The data is the data." I left her office. A few days later, we saw the quarterly report she and Florence had put together for the executive team. It was a work of fiction. They had cherry-picked vanity metrics. Instead of features shipped, they had a metric called innovative ideas brainstormed. Instead of bug resolution time, they had a chart showing the increase in interdepartmental communication, which was just a count of how many pointless meetings we'd been forced to attend. They presented the departure of our senior engineers as a successful cost-saving measure that streamlined the team. It was so dishonest, it was breathtaking. The executive team, who only wanted good news, bought it. For a little while, it seemed like they were going to get away with it. But you can't lie to the market. The final nail in the coffin was our biggest client, Project Condor, the one I'd warned Georgia about. They had been with us for over 10 years. They were a massive part of our annual revenue. After the disastrous client call with Megacorp, word had gotten around. The account manager for Project Condor started asking hard questions. He wanted to see a demo of the new features he'd been promised for the end of the year. Of course, those features didn't exist. Georgia and Florence tried to stall. They told him the features were in a beta testing phase and not ready for a demo. They offered him a discount on his next renewal as a sign of good faith. The client was old school. They didn't care about discounts. They cared about a product that worked. Their CTO requested a technical deep dive with our development team. Florence, knowing Georgia couldn't handle it, tried to block it. She told them our engineers were too busy working on delivering value to be pulled into meetings. This was a massive red flag for the client. They knew something was wrong. Around that time, the client's CTO happened to run into Arthur at a tech conference. Arthur was now working for a competitor, and by all accounts, he was thriving. I don't know what they talked about. Arthur would never say. But he was a man of integrity. I'm sure he was professional. He probably didn't even have to say anything bad. The CTO likely asked him, "Hey, what's going on over at your old company? Things seem off." Arthur probably just gave a polite non-committal answer, and that was enough. A week after that conference, the email landed. It was from the CEO of Project Condor. It was addressed to our CEO. It was a formal notice that they would not be renewing their contract. The email cited a complete collapse in product quality, missed deadlines, and a total lack of competent technical leadership. The loss of that contract was an earthquake. It wasn't something you could hide in a PowerPoint presentation. It was a multi-million-dollar hole in the company's revenue. News travels fast in a corporation. Within an hour, everyone knew, not just the details, but the exact wording from the email. A complete collapse in product quality. A total lack of competent technical leadership. The words were a direct indictment of everything Florence and Georgia had done. People I hadn't spoken to in months were stopping by my desk. "Hey, Travis, did you hear?" I just nodded. There was no celebration, no high fives. It just felt heavy. We had all watched this happen. We had seen it coming from a mile away. And now, the inevitable had happened. We had lost our best client because the company decided that ideology was more important than competence. That afternoon, a calendar invitation appeared in my inbox. It was from the executive vice president, the big boss, the one who reported directly to the CEO. The meeting was for the next morning. The only attendees listed were the VP, Florence, Georgia, and me. The subject line was just one word: Project Condor. I looked at that invitation for a long time. I knew what this was. This was the reckoning. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt a cold sense of calm. I had all my emails saved. I had all the data. I wasn't going to have to say a thing. The facts were going to speak for themselves. I went home that night, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The storm had finally arrived. The next morning, I walked into the top floor conference room. The VP was already there. He was a no-nonsense guy, an engineer by training who had come up through the ranks. He cared about one thing: results. He didn't say hello, just motioned for me to sit. Florence and Georgia came in a minute later. They looked like they hadn't slept. Florence tried to start with a cheerful, "Good morning." The VP just stared at her until she sat down. He slid a single piece of paper across the polished table. It was the termination email from Project Condor. "Explain this," he said. His voice was quiet, which was much scarier than if he had been yelling. Florence launched into her prepared speech. It was all damage control and corporate jargon. This is obviously a disappointing outcome, but it's also a learning opportunity. The client's needs were shifting. There was a misalignment of strategic priorities. We were already planning to pivot our resources. The VP let her talk for a full minute, his face like stone. Then he held up a hand to stop her. He turned to me. "Travis, you're the last senior man standing from Arthur's team. You've been here through all of this. I want the truth. No PowerPoints, no buzzwords. What happened?" This was it. I looked at Florence, then at Georgia. Then I looked back at the VP. "We lost them because we stopped being able to do our jobs," I said. I walked him through it. The firing of Arthur, a man who consistently delivered. The installation of Georgia, who had zero technical experience. The departure of our best talent. The shift in focus from product development to mandatory synergy circles and team-building retreats. The project that was greenlit against the advice of the entire senior technical staff. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts, one after another, like laying bricks in a wall. With every sentence, Florence's face got paler. Georgia just stared at the table. When I finished, the room was silent. The VP leaned back in his chair. He looked at Georgia. "Georgia," he said, "what is the primary function of a load balancer in a multi-tier web architecture?" It was a basic textbook question for anyone in our field. Georgia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked helplessly at Florence. The silence stretched on. It was brutal. The VP didn't wait for an answer she didn't have. He turned his gaze to Florence. "You got rid of the most effective manager in this company and replaced him with your friend, who doesn't know the first thing about our business. You hid the decline in performance with fake metrics. This isn't a misalignment of priorities. This is a catastrophic failure of leadership." He stood up. "The company has lost millions of dollars and our market reputation is damaged, all because of you." He looked at both of them. "Pack your desks. HR will meet you there." Then he turned and walked out of the room without another word. Florence and Georgia just sat there, completely stunned. The reality of what had just happened washed over them. I stood up, didn't look at them, and walked out. By the time I got back to my desk, the news was already spreading. An hour later, we saw them. The walk of shame. Each of them carrying a small cardboard box, escorted by building security. They didn't look at anyone. They just stared straight ahead. The next week, the VP held an all-hands meeting with our department. He apologized. He actually said the words, "Management made a mistake. We let you down." He announced they were bringing in an interim head, a veteran manager from another division who was known for being competent and drama-free. The atmosphere in the department instantly lifted. It felt like we could breathe again. A few weeks later, I was on LinkedIn. I saw that Arthur had updated his profile. He had been hired as a director of engineering at one of our biggest competitors. And I saw in his network that the 2 senior engineers who left first were now working for him. They had rebuilt the core of their old team. Good for them. It took our department the better part of a year to recover. We had to rebuild trust with our remaining clients and hire new talent to replace who we'd lost. The beanbag chairs and the ping pong table are still here. Nobody uses them. They're just a quiet reminder of a time when the people in charge thought that a good vibe was more important than a good product. I'm still here. The work is getting back to normal, but something was lost. the sense of loyalty, the feeling that the company had your back. We learned a valuable lesson. You can't fake competence. Eventually, reality always sends you the bill.